Welcome to Audio Gyan with Kedar Nimkar, a podcast that documents insightful conversations with Indian designers, artists, musicians, writers, thinkers and creatives of all types. Catch us on iTunes or visit audiogyan.com for more Gyan sessions. Here's your host Kedar Nimkar.
Today I have Paul Sandip with us on Audio Gyan. Paul is an international award-winning product designer, alumni of NID, electrical engineer and a cartoonist. He has designed over 300 plus iconic everyday objects in 121 product categories for clients across 14 countries. He's a winner of Red Dot Award twice and numerous international awards. In 2004, he created the spherical bulb holder and angular multi-plug for GM Modular, which became the most iconic bestseller designs in India and have now become standards in the electrical industry. This was his really small introduction of a person who likes to call himself as a designer of everyday objects. For more details, you can visit to paulstudio.in. That's Paul studio.in. Thanks, Paul, for giving us your time and welcome to Audio Gyan.
Thanks, Kedar, for the honor of having me on your wonderful podcast. I'm really thrilled and excited to talk to you.
So we'll be talking about everyday objects and probably also refer to Don Norman, whose book is there on design of everyday objects. But I'll start off with another great designer, Massimo Vignelli, who quoted that if you can design one thing, you can design everything. So if we consider this as a true statement by one of the legends, I was very curious to understand that since you cover a lot of products, are there chances of you falling short while going deep into designing a product?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Kedar. But I look at it in a different perspective. When you say, if one can design one thing, you can design everything. It's actually not the width we're talking about. It's actually enriching your experience of design. Yeah, so I don't look at it from expansion because when you're talking about multiple aspects of a process, right, then you could say that, okay, you might lose out on the depth. Because I just design. I do not look at any other aspect apart from the design of it. Like, I'm not selling my own product. I'm not looking at, other aspects of the project. I'm purely focusing on the design aspect of a product, right? And to enrich my experience, I would rather design a plethora of varied objects to increase my knowledge base in terms of production, in terms of manufacturing capabilities, and new materials and processes. So design is actually a creative process. And if I could design a pen, the process of designing a writing instrument for me is very similar while I'm designing maybe a home appliance, a air cooler, or a ceiling fan, or any other object. So to me, it's not the width. It's actually the depth which I gather by the experience of designing varied objects.
Okay, but so when you're actually working on a singular product and not multiple, then you can actually go into the depths of it, right? But when you're working on different products, don't you think that the specialization factor is hampered to a certain extent? On
the contrary, Kedar, companies hire me because I'm a generalist and not a specialist. I'll share an example. What happens is that when companies approach me, they're always stuck with an idea because they've been working on it again and again for many years. So they do not get a fresh perspective. When you go much deeper into the processes and do's and don'ts in a project, then it's actually very restrictive. And having a very fresh perspective is very important while dealing with newer challenges. So I always appreciate when I get a project which I haven't done before. I perform the best when I haven't done it before, because that's when I can ask silly questions. I'm allowed to ask silly questions because I'm a generalist, right? So the learning process is such that it allows me to question the obvious which may seem very obvious to them, but they sometimes come back to me, though, oh, why didn't we think of it? Then, of course, why didn't you think of it? Because what happens is when we design objects, we tend to forget the basics of it. We get too much critical into the processes and the limitations of it. So from that perspective, I feel always if you're doing it for the first time, you'll have a very fresh approach.
That's interesting because I think I'll have more clarity when we reach our last question, which I have specially kept to understand how probably with a case study that how we can, cool. So you've been referred as industrial sculptor in a lot of places. I've been reading some posts about you. So what is it like? How is an industrial sculptor different from an industrial designer? I mean, what is the line that separates these two?
Well, I wouldn't say it's actually separating. It's one facet of an industrial designer, which is the artistic bent of the designer is actually I think it's not a differentiating factor. It's basically another facet which adds on as an expression of a designer. Like, for example, when we're talking about industrial design, we start with understanding the need, and then we try to resolve those opportunity areas through our creative ideas, and you build on it, right? But when people refer to me as an industrial sculptor, they probably are looking at the form factor which I derive at in my projects, because those forms are very sculptural. Probably that's why they refer to me as an industrial sculptor. But for me, being an industrial sculptor is actually the process of removing the superfluous aspects of any product and trying to dig deep into the core of its essence. In that perspective, I see myself as a sculptor who, chisels out a statue from a block of stone, right? To bring out the inner beauty of the product. So that's probably how I look at it when I'm referred to as an industrial sculptor.
So that's the main aspect when an industrial sculptor is termed as, right? Or are there any more things to be added in terms of your skill set when you're working on an industrial product?
See, there's always this dilemma that, the form follows function or the function should evoke the form. So there's always been a great debate on this. But I think every project demands a unique approach. And certain projects which I've encountered in my career span till date required me to evolve a form factor which will define the functionality. For example, the clothesline peg, the yellow clip, which won the red dot actually. The idea was, can we create something monolithic? Can we create something which doesn't have multiple parts, yet look like a complete product and an interesting product? So the form factor, how we define, was actually getting more closer when we started looking at the fine nuances of the form, which would drive the function rather than the other way around.
Cool. So in the same context, so what's your process of defining your style? Because you obviously will be working under constraints and also adding your own constraints like form and function and stuff like that. So how do you ensure that the product which you design is actually defining your style?
Okay. That's another
right. If I have to elaborate on the question a bit more, is that there are paintings, right, which people identify through their strokes or through their medium in which it is made, and then it makes a statement that yes, this is designed by M.F. Hussain or something like that. So how does that happen in your context?
See, as I always say that I'm a designer of everyday objects. And why I emphasize on the fact of everyday objects is because these are the objects which go unnoticed, right? And their basic function is actually to help your life make easy, right? So from my style of design is giving a solution which people would come back and say, wow, and why didn't I think of it? It's not an aesthetic statement which I'm making through my designs. That's why you wouldn't find a thread of aesthetics which would be common in my designs, but you would find a thread of that wowness, which is that why didn't I think of it? Or questioning the obvious thing. That is what would define my product design. I'll give you an example. I was doing a project at LG Electronics, and the project was actually to design a LCD TV for the Indian market. Now tell me, how do you make a product Indian which is so global? A television is a global product, right? It doesn't actually define any context, right? So if you ask to design an Indian version of a LED, how would you approach it? So probably you would do a graphic treatment to it, maybe some prints and patterns or some color palette, trying to focus on the Indianness of it. But that's not my way of working. What I did in that project was that I feel that the utility should be Indian, not the aesthetics, right? Because a utility is what defines a culture. The way we look at things, the way we expect things to work and support us in our daily life is what defines or differentiates us as Indians from any other person, right? It's not the aesthetics. So what we did, we did a pan-India survey. We visited plenty of homes pan-India, and we understood what Indian television usage was, right? A product is always defined by the context of its use. So what we came across was very interesting. See, with the advent of this flat screen television, LCD and LEDs, what happened was that you would take it up to a wall and not keep it on the furniture, right? Because it became a thing of pride that, okay, you want a TV which goes on the wall. So now what was happening is that when you took it on the wall, where would you keep your DTH box? Because when you had a CRT TV, you would keep the DTH box or the other peripherals on the furniture below it. So now you didn't have any space. So people started doing jugaad. What we call in India, the jugaad is like finding means and methods to solve a problem at a local solution. So we found people using glass shelves beneath the televisions to keep their remotes and the DTH boxes, and all sorts of various kind of arrangements like temporary solutions. Another aspect which we were also looking at was that the Indian market is very, very price sensitive. And in that respect, when you are mounting a television on the wall, what happens to the stand? It's a complete waste because the product cost includes the cost of the stand, right? So the company has invested into the tooling of the product. The user has no use of it because the stand is irrelevant to him because he's wall mounting the television. That was the idea, that can we convert the stand into a shelf so that, so you could actually use that stand on the wall and make it a shelf, and you could keep your DTH box. And this was launched by LG Electronics in 2013, and it was named as the Transform TV. So that's the Indian insight. That's what makes a television Indian, because the way we use it, because nowhere else one would wall mount a 32-inch television on the wall. It's only for the larger television which you go up on the wall, but in India, it's still a thing of pride. So we kept that Indian sentiment alive through the product. We also made it cost effective. That now the stand has a purpose, definitive purpose. So the cost is justified. And all of it was at the same price level. So you have a new USP, new selling point, calling it the Indian USP at the same price point. I think that is what is, I would say, my way of approaching any project.
That's beautiful. I'm really, it's interesting. So, I think that naturally flows into my next question. Like, once you start selling the designer and not the design, object becomes expensive. This is one of your lines in one of your interviews. So can you explain what do you mean by that?
See, I've come across the situation many times when, one is wanting to engage a designer in a project. They always have this feeling that a designer would actually increase the cost of the product. The product would become expensive because in India still I would say the perception of a designer is that, okay, he's a fashion designer or maybe he's a interior designer. So anything which the end consumer has to pay more for is termed as a designer product. So a designer product has to be expensive, will be expensive, right?
Yeah. In fact, other domains also, designer shirt or designer cars. Yeah.
Exactly. So whenever you're talking about a designer thing, means that you have to pay more for it, right? But my approach here is to kill that elitism in design. I want to make everyday objects well designed, because I feel that everybody has a right to good design. And that is possible when you make the designer anonymous and the product the hero. So that is what my effort has always been, to create a product which people would associate with and would want to own it. It's not because so and so has designed, that's why I would want it, but because the product is so good that I would want it.
Yeah, there's also a plus side to it, because then things are not sold at the name value, like at the face value of it.
Of course, only the merit of the product would define the success of the product. No, I think this is what I wanted to emphasize, so that I've always believed in making the product the hero. Where you don't have to advertise about the product, because the product is so good in any ways that you would want to use it. So focus your energies and I always tell my clients, let's focus all our energies towards creating a good product. Then we will not have to push it in the market. We'll be able to create a pull. See, all the techniques of marketing and advertising are required when you really have a mediocre product. Otherwise, you wouldn't have to push it, right? If you create a wonderful product, you can create a pull. People would come chasing you after you to own that product.
That's very noble of you, actually, to do this kind of a stunt. We'll slightly take a tour here, different, which is on your work. So your design of a spherical bulb holder has become a standard in the electrical product industry. So can you tell our listeners, how did the product you made bring so much impact in the electrical products manufacturing industry overall?
Well, this was a very interesting situation where I was engaged by GM Modular, a company based out of Mumbai, and they were venturing out into the electrical product space. My role was actually to identify these mundane objects and create some uniqueness into them. How I started on the project was very interesting. I looked at the most mundane object in the electrical trade, which was the bulb holder. And the bulb holder had been same the way it was designed 100 years back. Everything around it had changed except the product itself. So what I felt was that when you're doing up your interiors, all that is fine, but when you're trying to plug in a bulb, you still have that old industrial, technical looking bulb holder with all those screw holes and, all those engineering details visible. The idea was very, very simple, actually. The idea was the intent was to cover up those holes and make it look beautiful aesthetically. So now the challenge was this product, which was a standard in the industry for over a century old, you can understand how cost effective it might have gone over those years. My idea of adding another shell around it to hide the holes was an expensive proposition. It was actually increasing the price of the product. But then I could manage to convince the director of GM Modular that even though we are increasing the price of the product, the perceived value of the product is going up many folds. This could create a new category of a product. And I think he bought the point, and I really appreciate that he took that risk of bringing out a slightly more expensive product, which was a very, very mundane object. You don't look at a bulb holder while you're buying it, right? You just ask for it and you get it. Or sometimes even you don't buy it. Your electrician buys it. So now, when we talk about the electrician part, this was again a very interesting aspect to that design, which actually propagated the design because most of the electricians started preferring this design because their output started looking like people would say, "Oh, you've done a neat job. You've got us a good bulb holder." Yeah. So what happened was that since this is such a mundane product and you will not buy it, and mostly the electricians would go and buy it, so they started recommending this product. And over the period of 12, 13 years now, because I had designed this in 2004, this bulb holder has now replaced the regular bulb holder completely. And this has done really, really good business for not only the brand, but now it has become a standard so that, every manufacturing company who has to have a bulb holder now has the spherical bulb holder version of it. It's very exciting to see how well it was appreciated by the entire trade, because they really felt that this design had added value to a product which was completely overlooked over centuries. And I think that's a great satisfaction for me as a designer as well, that I could create something which really could change the direction or make a small dent in the way people started looking at electrical accessories. And then onwards, people actually started looking at, can we do a real good design of a flex box or a spike guard? Because these were objects which were utility objects, right? No one had ever thought that these should be well designed too. So that the entire industry now is design driven. The electrical trade, which wasn't design driven at all, which was only purely function driven, is now design driven. If you see the exhibitions which are held every year, the ASTEC, the Electrama, you'll find companies talking about their design, the aesthetics of such mundane objects. I think that's a phenomenal change which has happened. And a lot of designers are also looking up to this industry now, that, okay, we could also bring change in the industry.
Mm-hmm. And can you tell us some of the challenges other than like we're working on this spherical bulb, other than the price point?
See, I think in any project, the major challenge is to convince your client to believe when you're doing something new, to invest. I think getting the funding for the project is the most critical aspect of it. See, because everything else gets sorted out. If there's a will, there's a way. And you have to tap that will of the investor.
In terms of like lowering down the plastic quality or making it like a single body unit, any of those things you can mention about? No,
see, as I said, the initial product cost was higher than the regular product. So this was a very unique case study, because mostly, no one would accept a design solution which is going to increase up the production cost. So that is the uniqueness of this project, that the perceived value was so high that people still invested in the product, which was slightly expensive than the regular ones. The price and the positioning of the product was the most challenging thing, and it wasn't easy to convince, because I had made several prototypes. Because once you show a product, a 3D rendering or your vision on a flat screen, it doesn't help. You have to actually show how it works and the ease of use. It's so easy to mount and dismount this product. So all those aspects, but I don't see them as a challenge. As the greatest challenge was to convince to give birth to this product idea. So
yeah, I would like to conclude with one last question, which is since you have made more than 300 of everyday objects in 121 categories. So how do you generally identify an opportunity for invention in design? Invention, not exactly invention, but how do you find that opportunity? Yes, that this particular sector or this particular line of products need design intervention, and then design them. So what's the process like?
Now, this again is a very interesting process, because I'm a cartoonist. Before I came into design as a profession, and even before I did my engineering, I was a cartoonist, professional cartoonist. And one thing I would like to share is that, the modern observations of a cartoonist is what defines the uniqueness. The observational skills. Maybe there would be 10 people sitting in a room, but a cartoonist would observe the most critical and the most subtle nuances and highlight them through his expression. So for me, probably I'm still trying to express my observations, and the medium is through objects. So everything around me is an inspiration, and I always keep noticing, if someone's opening the door and if having a problem, so I would notice that. I notice every little detail. in my everyday life. And that is what allows me to gather opportunities of design intervention. I'll give you another example of such a observation which turned into a very, very successful product. We all use these regular multi-plugs, right? Those multi-plug pins, 3-pin plugs, which you plug into a socket and you have those 2 pins on the top, 2 pin on the bottom, and those 3 pin in the front, right? So I'll cite an example of an observation here. Have these 2-pin plugs, and after certain times of usage, these 2-pin plugs tend to get loose, right? And with these regular multi-plugs, what happens is when you push the 2-pin plug on the underside of these multi-plugs, it tends to fall due to gravity. So, and it's a very small thing, but then it's not a good feeling. It's not a good thing to happen when you're plugged in and you're working and suddenly the plug falls off and your light goes off. It's not a very pleasant feeling. So see how this is an opportunity. So what I did was that I just made a slant angle of 40 degrees of the bottom part of the multi-plug so that you could plug and the 2-pin would get automatically locked into it due to gravity, due to the slope. Yeah, and that gave birth to another product category, which is the angular multi-plug. So this idea again stems from a very simple observation. So you just have to keep. I always say, don't look, don't just see, look around you. We tend to, overlook things, and we see many things, but we need to look at them carefully and be observant. I think that's the key to innovation, for me at least.
It's really inspirational to hear this. Cool. I think this is a good note to end this. Obviously, there are tons of things to be spoken about in the industrial design space. And I would like to really have you again on AudioGAN where we can chat about something more and the new products which you will be designing. So all the best to you. And thanks once again for giving us your time.
Oh, thanks, Kedar. It's been a wonderful, it was really a pleasure talking to you and really look forward to more such interactions in the future. Thanks again. Good night.
And that's it from today's Gyan session. Catch us on iTunes, Saavn, Stitcher or any podcasting app you use. Do rate us on iTunes and follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. Stay tuned for more Gyan on audiogan.com. Till then, bye.